Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
Shao. Riven moved like shadowed intent across the ruined streets, muscles coiling with silent precision. The city was dead, abandoned by its fragile occupants, yet something flickered among the rubble. The scent was unmistakable, blood, sweat, and fear, layered over decay and ash. The pack tensed, a ripple passing through Shard and Maw, feral offspring shuffling eagerly at the edges. Every instinct focused on a single signal: prey. The first human emerged cautiously, feet scuffing over broken concrete, backpack bouncing like a metronome of panic. They did not see Riven crouched in the shadows, observing, calculating. The human's pulse was erratic, frantic, but beneath it throbbed something far more interesting. Flesh that could not die. Cells that rebuilt themselves in the wake of destruction. Riven could sense it not intellectually, but with a primal awareness honed by months of hunting, feeding, and learning. Riven signaled without sound. Shard lunged first, teeth slicing the air. The human's scream split the silence, a raw, ear-piercing wail. Maw moved to flank, massive jaws ready to anchor the prey, while feral offspring attempted clumsy bites from the opposite side. The human twisted, jerking backward, adrenaline fueling desperation, but the pack adjusted instinctively, nudging and cornering, every motion perfectly coordinated without a word. Then the first bite. Riven sank teeth into the human's forearm, feeling the warm resistance give way to pliant flesh. The pull of sinew and muscle was familiar, comforting in its brutality. Yet beneath the bite something impossible happened. The flesh knit itself back together, pink and slick, organs reforming as if mocking the terror. The human screamed again, but Riven understood. This cycle was infinite. The prey could not die, could not escape. The pack moved as one, each member fulfilling a role born of instinct and necessity. Shard distracted, dashing unpredictably, teeth snapping, fingers raking. Maw anchored, massive and unyielding. Feral offspring flailed in chaotic attempts, yet even their mistakes served to shape the rhythm. And Riven, leader, conductor of this grotesque symphony, adjusted with subtle gestures, tilting ahead, a careful shift of weight, nudging the prey toward optimal angles for consumption. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in a haze of tearing, screaming, and regeneration. The human's body became a canvas of continuous destruction and repair. A torn thigh, knit even as an arm, was shredded. A chest ripped open and reformed, taut and pink. Each cycle honed the pack's coordination, revealing weaknesses in the prey's movements, subtle variations in strategy, and, most importantly, the strange pulsating cadence of the regenerative flesh itself. The first anomaly emerged without warning. The human, writhing mid-cycle, vomited violently, spewing a mixture of acid and partially digested food. The scent stung, sharp and acrid, almost overwhelming. The pack hesitated for a heartbeat, instincts momentarily disrupted. But Riven did not panic. Instead, a new strategy emerged. Shard adjusted angle, Maw shifted pressure, feral offspring lunged with renewed intent. Even in chaos, the pack adapted. The human's body, momentarily altered, healed faster, regenerating tissue in irregular patterns, creating new textures, new opportunities for feeding. The prey resisted differently than expected. Small, precise movements, a twist here, a feint there, were unpredictable, forcing Riven to account for subtleties the pack had never encountered. This was no ordinary human. Every scream, every jerk, every attempt to fight back became part of the hunt, part of the teaching, part of the cycle itself. Riven's senses tracked each heartbeat, each pulse, each micro-expression of fear. The prey's eyes darted constantly, wide with terror, searching for escape, allies, or salvation. The pack interpreted it as instinct, pattern recognition, a rhythm to be understood and exploited. Feral offspring learned rapidly, following Riven's silent guidance, experimenting with bite angles, pressure, and timing. The cycle became more intricate, more methodical, yet never losing its chaotic unpredictability. Another unforeseen moment arrived. The human seized a shard of broken concrete from the ground, swinging it with desperate, chaotic force. Maw staggered under the blow. Feral offspring scattered briefly. Shard recoiled, and for the first time, Riven felt a flicker of intrigue. This prey could adapt, could strike, could force the pack to adjust in real time. It was dangerous, yes, but delicious. The cycle continued, faster now, more precise. Teeth sank, fingernails raked, sinew tore, flesh healed in a grotesque dance. The humans screamed, vomited, twisted, fought, and healed. Regeneration became unpredictable, a puzzle the pack solved instinctively, reshaping strategy with each repetition. The prey was learning too, responding to the pack's movements, anticipating patterns, forcing them to constantly innovate. And still, the human did not die. Every organ, every limb, every inch of flesh rebuilt itself instantly. Alpha instincts merged with calculated adaptation. Riven observed as the prey's muscles tensed, trying to resist, to escape, to survive against impossible odds. The pack moved with growing cohesion, exploiting the cycle, adjusting for every nuance of the human's reactions. Then came something entirely new, the human whispered. Soft, fragmented words, unintelligible, yet strangely rhythmic. Riven paused, sensing vibrations in the air, subtle frequencies carried through bone and sinew. Not a threat. Not a challenge. Something else. Curiosity? Desperation? Recognition? The pack did not understand words, but instinctively they perceived intent. The prey was learning, observing, attempting to manipulate the cycle. Feral offspring, emboldened by Riven's calm focus, experimented further. Bites became irregular, teeth tore in asymmetrical patterns, claws raked in unexpected directions. The human healed inconsistently, sinew knitting twisted, organs forming oddly, sometimes generating small flares of pain elsewhere. The chaos fed the pack, sharpening reflexes, refining coordination, teaching lessons without words. Time blurred entirely. The city outside, the empty streets, shattered buildings, distant smoke, was irrelevant. Only the cycle mattered. Tear, bite, scream, heal, repeat. The human's shrieks became rhythm. The vomiting became percussion. The feints and swings became improvisation within the symphony. Riven felt satisfaction not in killing, but in perfecting the cycle, in learning, in orchestrating the eternal feast. And then the human froze for a heartbeat. Eyes wide, staring not at the pack, but at something unseen in the shadows beyond the alley. A sound? A movement? An instinctive calculation? The pack hesitated almost imperceptibly, twitching, claws scratching the pavement. The prey's awareness added complexity to the hunt, a layer of tension previously unknown. Riven tilted the head, curious, sensing the pulse of intelligence in the fragile form. Finally, the first minor victory of instinct over surprise. The human lunged, teeth snapping. A flailing kick connecting with Shard's side. The blow staggered the small zombie, creating a new opening. Riven adjusted, moving with seamless precision, guiding Maw to anchor more efficiently, signaling feral offspring to reposition. The cycle resumed, now deeper, more intricate, more grotesque. Regeneration, feeding, struggle, endless, eternal, beautiful in its horror. The prey could fight, could adapt, could scream, could vomit, could strike, but could not escape. The pack adapted endlessly in response, learning from every action, every reaction, every chaotic moment. And Riven, leader, predator, conductor, understood something fundamental. This was not just feeding. It was evolution. Observation. Study, guide, taught. Entertainment. The prey, fragile and defiant, had become part of the rhythm. The pack had become more than instinct. They were aware in small, perfect increments, responding, adapting, growing. Somewhere in the distance, more humans moved, fragile and ignorant. Riven could smell them, sense the pulse of life they carried, know instinctively that more cycles would begin, more feasts would unfold. And the first prey, trapped in its endless regeneration, would continue to teach, to test, to feed the pack again and again forever. The cycle would continue. Always. The pack moved as one, a single predator threading through the wreckage of the city. Riven led, muscles coiled beneath mottled flesh, eyes scanning for the tiniest irregularity in the wind, the faintest pulse of fear carried across broken streets. Shard skittered ahead, claws clicking over shards of concrete and glass, ears twitching for the subtle sounds of life. Maw followed the leader's flank, immense and steady, a brutal anchor. Feral offspring trailed, chaotic but eager, learning the rhythm, mimicking patterns, adjusting instinctively. They were no longer hunting a single prey. The city was full of them, humans scurrying through abandoned buildings, slipping down alleys, hiding behind cracked walls and shattered cars. Riven could smell their hesitation, their fear, the way their pulse raced just beneath the surface of fragile skin. The regeneration hum was faint here and there, irregular but detectable. Multiple targets meant multiple cycles, multiple lessons. And the pack would adapt to each one. The first group appeared in a broken courtyard. 3 humans moving carefully, whispering to one another, their voices sharp and intrusive in the quiet decay. Riven crouched low, sensing the rhythm of their steps. Each heartbeat was a note, each breath a tremor on the wind. The pack moved silently, spreading out like shadows over the walls, corners, and debris. This was not a chase yet, it was observation, calculation. The humans paused. One lifted a flashlight, sweeping across the courtyard, and Riven felt the thrill of the reaction. The subtle tensing of muscles, the twitch of pupils, the spike of adrenaline. The scent of fear was stronger now, mixed with curiosity and strategy. They thought themselves clever, plotting escape. Riven tilted the head. Cleverness did not matter. Regeneration always balanced the equation. Shard struck first. Fast, precise, a blur of teeth and claws forcing the nearest human to stumble. Ma anchored the group as Riven circled, anticipating patterns, predicting movements, subtly adjusting the angles of attack. Feral offspring lunged unpredictably, tearing at clothing, biting at limbs, learning from each reaction. The humans screamed, shouted, and flailed, but their bodies healed instantly from the first small injuries. The cycle began. One human, the largest, tried to fight back, swinging a piece of metal in desperation. It clanged against Ma's skull, barely making an impression, but the movement created an opening. Riven adjusted, circling, snapping teeth at shoulders and arms in a rhythm perfected over countless cycles. The humans dodged, twisted, screamed, vomited. Every unpredictable reaction was absorbed by the pack, every error, every desperate maneuver, teaching them, honing them. Then came the anomaly. A human, the smallest of the group, froze, eyes wide, and for a moment the pack sensed hesitation, confusion. Instead of screaming, it whispered, a strange vibration in the air that rippled across the pack. Instinct recognized threat and curiosity together. The human seemed to understand the cycle, to attempt manipulation. Riven tilted the head, scenting the pulse beneath the skin. Intelligence, defiance, unpredictability. The humans scattered. One ran left, another right, the smallest ducking behind debris, attempting to hide. The pack shifted seamlessly, roles redefined in an instant. Shard pursued the runner on the left, Ma pressed the center, and feral offspring fanned to corner the smallest. Riven's focus never wavered. Observation and adaptation were as critical as hunger. This was no longer mere feeding, it was learning, strategy, evolution. As they hunted, regeneration revealed its unpredictable nature. A shoulder torn open, healed misaligned, forcing the human to stumble, creating a new opening. A leg mangled in a bite grew twisted, throwing off the human's balance. The cycle became more chaotic, more grotesque, more instructive. The pack absorbed each irregularity, adjusting it instinctively, flowing like liquid around the prey. Suddenly, one human collapsed mid-stride, vomiting acid and partially digested food. The scent was powerful, almost overwhelming, yet no member of the pack hesitated. Instead, they adapted. Shard circled, avoiding the slick Ma repositioned. Feral offspring tested new angles. The human healed almost instantly as if mocking its own fragility, the regenerative pulse accelerating in response to trauma. The rhythm of the hunt had changed, and the pack responded in kind. The smallest human, hidden behind a collapsed wall, tried something different. It whispered again, repeating strange patterns of sound, and Riven felt the vibration in the air like a faint pulse. It was not loud, not threatening, but intentional. It was the first time the pack recognized that prey might attempt to influence the cycle deliberately. Fascinating. Dangerous. Delicious. Shard's movements became less predictable, weaving erratically, teeth snapping in microbursts, claws grazing unexpectedly. Ma shifted with subtle angles, anchoring with uneven pressure to exploit every misstep. Feral offspring experimented with asymmetric bites, teeth tearing at the flesh in ways that created new regenerative responses. Riven observed, adjusted, guided, a conductor orchestrating a living symphony of horror. And then the courtyard collapsed in chaos. The humans, desperate, tried to flee through a partially ruined stairwell. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling. One beam cracked, crashing onto feral offspring. The small zombie stumbled, teeth grazing empty air. For a heartbeat, Riven hesitated, instinctively recalculating. Chaos disrupted the rhythm, but the pack adapted instantly. Shard leapt to intercept the first runner, Maw pressed from behind, and Riven circled overhead, teeth sinking into the largest prey's back mid-fall. The regenerative cycle intensified. Limbs shredded and knit together in seconds. Organs rebuilt as if mocking pain. Screams merged with the crash of stone and debris, vomiting, twisting, flailing, until the courtyard became a maelstrom of movement, sound, and survival. The pack moved like one organism, learning, adjusting, thriving on unpredictability. Riven noticed something remarkable. One human, tiny and defiant, began using objects around it, metal scraps, debris, to try to impede the pack. Slamming, throwing, creating minor diversions. Every failed attempt fed the cycle, creating new lessons, new feeding opportunities. The pack absorbed it all, instinct evolving in real time. Every human act of desperation became part of the rhythm of hunting, feeding, and learning. As the cycle wore on, the pack's coordination became almost fluid. Shard anticipated human reflexes, Maw adjusted to altered angles of attack, feral offspring learned the subtle cues of prey movement. Riven guided the swarm with imperceptible gestures, a tilt of the head, a shift of weight, a flick of a claw. Each moment of chaos was converted into mastery. The human's regenerative resilience became both challenge and fascination. Finally, the last human, exhausted, collapsed into a heap. Not dead. Not free. Regeneration continued, twitching, knitting, growing in a grotesque loop. Riven circled slowly, tasting the air, sensing the pulses, watching the interplay of fear, adaptation, and renewal. The pack had learned something new today. Prey could adapt, manipulate, resist, and yet remain bound in the eternal cycle. This was no longer mere feeding. It was evolution, training, education, and entertainment intertwined. The city outside remained empty, silent, unaware of the horrors unfolding within its broken walls. But Riven could smell more humans beyond the streets, scattered, frightened, waiting to enter the cycle. The swarm would find them. The pack would teach them. And the endless feast would continue growing, evolving, perfecting itself in the relentless rhythm of bite, scream, heal, repeat. And somewhere in the back of Riven's awareness, a single truth resonated, primal and undeniable. The cycle would never end. Not while the humans remained fragile, not while the pack remained hungry, not while regeneration mocked mortality itself. Eternal. You. Perfect. Horrifying. The next wave would come. And Riven would be ready. The ruins stretched farther than the pack had anticipated. Broken streets and hollowed buildings forming a labyrinth of death and decay. Riven moved like shadowed intent through the alleys, senses attuned to the faintest tremor of flesh, the minutest scent of panic. Shard flitted ahead, claws scraping against jagged concrete, while Maw's massive frame followed in perfect rhythm. Feral offspring skulked behind, twitching and observing, learning every movement, every tactic, every instinctual decision the leader made. The city had changed since the first hunts. Humans had begun to scatter in patterns, fleeing when they caught wind of the predators. Some carried cameras, smartphones, or makeshift recording devices, attempting to document what they thought was survival. Some set traps, marking them with fluorescent tape, thinking intellect could outmaneuver instinct. Riven could smell every heartbeat, every hesitation, every spike of fear. Humans were fragile, but cleverness was predictable, and predictability was a weakness. A narrow street stretched before them, littered with debris, overturned cars, and splintered storefronts. Riven's nostrils flared at the scent of blood mingled with sweat. There were 3 humans up ahead, 2 moving cautiously. One crouched behind the shattered remains of a newsstand, trying to angle a camera to capture the pack's movements. Their breaths were shallow, their heartbeats irregular, a rhythm Riven could feel vibrating through the ground, pulsing through the cracked asphalt. Shard darted forward, teeth glinting in the dim light, claws tearing at rusted metal as it moved. The humans panicked at the sudden movement, shrieking as adrenaline spiked. Maw followed, anchoring the path, jaws snapping around a leg and sending a shock of terror through the prey. Feral offspring lunged haphazardly, tearing at sleeves, hair, and arms, learning from both success and failure. Riven remained calm, circling, observing, orchestrating the hunt with micro-adjustments. A tilt of the head here. A subtle shift in weight there. The first bite ripped through the air. Riven sank teeth deep into the first human's shoulder, hearing the squelch of muscle tearing, the faint snap of tendon. The scream that followed was a high-pitched, piercing shriek, Pure terror carried through lungs and throat. The human twisted violently, but the bite held. The shoulder shredded and rebuilt in seconds, knitting itself together in grotesque, almost deliberate precision. Riven felt the pulse of regeneration, subtle vibrations beneath the flesh. The prey's body moved like a machine, adapting instinctively to the feeding, yet never escaping, never overcoming the rhythm of the pack. The second human swung a metal pipe, striking Ma's massive flank with a clang that rattled through bone and sinew. Feral offspring stumbled slightly, teeth grazing empty air. Shard reacted instantly, shifting trajectory, teeth snapping into the first human's thigh. The sound of flesh tearing was wet and sharp, a counterpoint to the screams, a note in the ongoing symphony of horror. The first human's leg shredded under the bite, and then, almost immediately, regrew, sinew knitting together like wet clay, pink and slick. Each scream became an intricate rhythm, each flail of desperation an opportunity to teach, to experiment, to perfect. Riven circled back, observing the human holding the camera. There was curiosity there, intelligence, even defiance. The pack smelled it, tasted it in the air, a difference in heartbeat, a hesitation in movement. This prey was aware. And awareness was a variable to be exploited. Shard darted in, claws tearing its sleeves, shredding soft tissue. Ma struck from the flank, massive jaws clamping onto the camera wielder's leg, forcing a scream that mingled with the others. Feral offspring pounced, biting into an arm, dragging it partially free as Riven shifted, teeth sinking into the neck, tearing a section of flesh that immediately began knitting itself together. The humans writhed, vomited, clawed at the pack, but the regenerative cycle worked its relentless rhythm. One human tried to flee down a narrow corridor, the pack splitting seamlessly. Shard blocked the path ahead, Ma anchored behind, feral offspring fanned to the sides, Riven following with precise timing. A thrown object, a shard of metal, a brick, struck Ma's shoulder, grazing bone and tearing shallow flesh. The scent of iron mixed with fear, a sharp tang in the air. The prey's body healed instantly, but the minor injury created a predictable imbalance in movement. Shard lunged, teeth tearing at the torso, Ma clamped again, and the human's scream became a shrill, twisted symphony. The chaos did not stop there. The humans had attempted traps, ropes stretched across doorways, boxes of debris set as barriers. But the pack adapted instantly. Riven's instincts guided the swarm. Shard leapt over wires, Ma pushed aside debris with massive weight. Feral offspring scrambled over and under obstacles. Every human attempt to manipulate the environment only created new opportunities. Each bite, tear, and shredded limb fed the pack not only sustenance but knowledge. The regenerative pulse of the prey responded in patterns, creating new variables to explore, and Riven relished each one. The feeding became a brutal ballet. Fingers were torn off, eyes clawed at, muscles shredded, yet the humans healed in real time, flesh knitting, bones resetting, organs reassembling in seconds. Screams pierced the ruined city, echoing off broken walls and hollowed storefronts, blending with the wet tearing sounds of flesh. The humans' attempts to use intellect, cameras, traps, improvised weapons added unpredictable dynamics to the hunt. They were clever, yes, but predictability hid beneath their cleverness, and Riven exploited it with precise, instinctive brutality. One human vomited violently mid-struggle, a gush of acid and half-digested food that splattered across the cracked concrete. The smell stung, harsh and pungent, yet the pack ignored it. Shard darted forward, nipping at the torso. Ma shifted to avoid the mess but clamped onto an arm, and feral offspring scrambled to intercept the smallest prey. The regenerative effect accelerated in response to trauma, creating a new layer of grotesque texture, skin knitting together in twisted patterns, organs twitching as they reformed. The humans writhed, screamed, flailed, but could not escape. Riven observed every detail. The flinch of the leg, the subtle tilt of the head, the heartbeat racing in panic. The pack was not simply feeding, it was learning. Every defensive movement, every improvised weapon, every whispered plea and scream was noted in instinct and memory. Feral offspring mirrored Riven's subtle adjustments, experimenting with angles, pressures, and bite patterns. Shard anticipated movement before it happened, positioning with razor-sharp precision. Ma applied brute force where necessary, anchoring and controlling the prey. Finally, the pack converged on the last survivor, a small defiant human, clutching a broken piece of wood as a club. It swung wildly, connecting with Shard's shoulder, a glancing blow that tore a shallow groove in the skin. Riven circled, teeth sinking into the prey's back, dragging them down into the center of the pack. The wood splintered, fingers shredded, teeth and claws tearing with surgical brutality. The regenerative pulse accelerated, healing shredded limbs even as the pack experimented with new angles, twisting the human's body to expose new soft spots. The screams became music, the writhing a dance, the vomit a percussive accent to the symphony of consumption. By the end, the humans were reduced to twitching, regenerating chaos, trapped within the pack's perfected cycle. Not dead. Not free. Eternal. The pack lingered over the broken courtyard, tasting the residue of blood and fear, analyzing patterns in instinct and regeneration, refining coordination. Feral offspring crouched, twitching, eyes bright with understanding, having learned more in a single hunt than in weeks of scattered feeding. Shard flexed claws and shifted, yawning almost, anticipation building for the next wave of humans. And Riven stood at the center, calm, calculating, savoring the knowledge gained, already sensing the next pulse of life beyond the horizon. The city remained hollow, silent and oblivious, but the pack knew better. Prey lurked, fragile, clever, terrified. They would come again, and Riven's orchestration of the cycle would continue. More efficient, more brutal, more calculated. Every bite, every scream, every regenerative twitch of flesh was both lesson and feast. The hunting grounds expanded, the eternal chase continued, and the pack evolved, learning with each heartbeat, each pulse of life, each scream in the ruined city. And somewhere, deep in instinct, Riven understood the ultimate truth. The cycle of flesh was endless, perfect in horror and eternal in its demands. There would always be more prey. There would always be more screams. And the pack, guided by Riven, would always adapt. The city was a grid of silent signals and faint pulses, each human movement a ripple in the stagnant air. Riven led the pack, senses stretched, measuring, predicting, calculating. Feral offspring followed, their instincts sharpened by the previous hunts, movements synchronized, teeth bared, claws flexing with anticipation. Shard darted ahead, nose twitching over rubble, ears picking up the slightest flinch. Maw pressed from behind, massive and unyielding, a brutal anchor to control the pack's rhythm. Humans had begun to adapt. Traps were scattered across alleys, snares and pits designed to cripple, ropes strung at shoulder height, boards angled to slow pursuit. Riven detected every subtle disruption. A snap of wood, the faint creak of a rope, the vibration of stone under a human foot. The pack adjusted instantly, splitting and reforming, a fluid organism responding to every variable. This was no longer just feeding. It was education, evolution, strategy, and terror, all at once. The first human appeared at the edge of the square, carrying what they clearly believed was a weapon, a rusted metal pipe. But more importantly, they were attempting to control space. They aimed, lunged, and swung. Riven observed the micropatterns: hesitation in the swing, misalignment, overcompensation in balance. The pack moved as one. Shard snapped at the wrist holding the pipe. Maw clamped the legs. Feral offspring tore at the torso. The humans screamed, a high, ear-splitting cry that echoed across abandoned streets. Limbs tore, muscle shredded, blood gushed. But the regenerative cycle was already weaving its grotesque magic, knitting torn sinew, reforming organs in a blink. Another human triggered a pit trap, collapsing partially into the rubble. The pack paused, instinctively, but only for a heartbeat. Riven adjusted, circling, teeth sinking into the exposed shoulder of the first prey, dragging it back toward the trapped second. Shard leapt over the edge, landing precisely, claws scraping against crumbling concrete. Maw pressed from behind, massive weight crushing the human's torso against jagged edges. Feral offspring scrambled up walls and debris, biting into arms and legs, drawing screams that mingled with the wet tearing of flesh. The regenerative pulse sped, healing shredded tissue, twisting it unpredictably, creating new variables. Humans began to experiment with tactics, decoys, sudden feints, screaming in patterns, attempting to distract the pack. Riven observed each with intense awareness. The pack responded, subtly adjusting, dividing attention, testing angles, refining coordination. Shard began anticipating feints, striking preemptively. Maw applied variable pressure, forcing the regenerative flesh to twitch and bulge under controlled strain. Feral offspring experimented with asymmetric bites, tearing limbs at irregular angles, ensuring maximum disorientation and chaos while still maintaining control. One human attempted to record the events, waving a small camera as if documentation could influence fate. Riven tilted the head. Intelligence was irrelevant to escape, but it was entertaining, stimulating, and informative. Shard snapped at the device, the camera shattered, shards embedding in the prey's skin, causing sharp pain that created micro-openings for bites. Maw tore at an arm, feral offspring lunged into the chest. Flesh rebuilt even as it tore, the human twisting, vomiting, gagging, writhing in endless loops. The pack learned from every response, adapting instinctively, refining techniques. Then came an unexpected development. A human froze, eyes wide, whispering incoherent words. Riven felt the vibrations in the air, subtle, rhythmic, deliberate. Not threatening. Not useful. But meaningful. The pack paused instinctively, analyzing, learning, noting the patterns. The human was attempting manipulation, trying to influence the rhythm of the hunt. Riven's instincts flickered with interest. It was rare, almost exciting, prey attempting strategy, unaware that every action fed the pack's intelligence. The regenerative cycle became a tool. Riven guided the pack to exploit it. Shard bit at the same limb repeatedly, forcing tissue to knit imperfectly. Maw tore, twisted, anchored, shaping the prey's recovery. Feral offspring experimented with angles of approach, adjusting pressure and force, learning to manipulate the cycle without allowing escape. The human's reactions became increasingly erratic, each scream, vomit, or flail a new variable to master. The pack evolved in response, instincts growing sharper, more coordinated, almost sentient in their effectiveness. A human attempted to flee, sprinting down a narrow alley, but Riven anticipated the trajectory. Shard cut ahead, snapping at legs. Maw pressed from behind, jaws clamping around shoulders. Feral offspring fanned out along the sides, tearing clothing, biting, pinning Chi. The prey twisted, vomiting violently, skin tearing under teeth, limbs regrowing in seconds, flesh knitting together in twisted patterns. Each scream was a note, each flail a rhythm in the evolving symphony of hunting and learning. The pack began differentiating between prey. Some humans were clever, defiant, strategic, worth prolonged cycles, repeated testing, teaching. Others were frail, panicked, instinctively predictable, devoured quickly, regenerated quickly, but used as pure reinforcement of the rhythm. The subtle hierarchy emerged without words. Riven recognized patterns in behavior, assigning roles almost unconsciously. Shard mirrored the nuanced movements, Maw adapted strength and pressure, feral offspring experimented more boldly. Every hunt was a lesson in control, chaos, and refinement. Suddenly a trap detonated, a jury-rigged device of metal scraps and fire. The heat licked at feral offspring, smoke stung the eyes, and one small zombie staggered under the blast. Riven adjusted instinctively. Shard leapt to intercept prey before they could capitalize on the chaos. Maw twisted, crushing a human into rubble. Feral offspring adapted to avoid flames while maintaining attacks. The human's attempts to exploit traps only fed the pack's learning. Each human tactic became a teaching moment, their intelligence inadvertently sharpening the zombie's coordination. The feeding grew increasingly grotesque. Limbs were torn. Claws sank deep into muscle. Teeth punctured organs. Blood ran in rivulets across cracked concrete, mixing with vomit, ash, and debris. Humans screamed, flailed, vomited, clawed at teeth and jaws, but regeneration rendered death meaningless. Each wound became a puzzle, a variable in the cycle, and the pack absorbed the lessons instinctively. Every shred of tissue, every twitching nerve, every flinch of pain was catalogued in primal memory, guiding the pack in perfect, horrifying harmony. At one point, a human, small but bold, tried to evade by diving into a partially collapsed building. Riven tilted his head, sensing the shift. Shard followed through a narrow opening, claws scraping walls. Maw pushed rubble aside, exposing vulnerable limbs. Feral offspring lunged unpredictably from above. Limbs tore, organs pulsed with regeneration. Screams filled the hollowed corridor. The cycle was relentless, unending, perfect. Each minute became an eternity for prey, a playground for predators. The pack experimented more deliberately. Riven guided Shard to target specific muscles to manipulate regeneration speed. Maw twisted limbs to force misalignment in the rebuilt tissue. Feral offspring experimented with asymmetric feeding patterns to teach the prey subtle lessons. Flinch here, twist there, scream in a precise rhythm. Each interaction deepened the understanding of how regeneration could be manipulated, how humans could be categorized, how chaos could be controlled without restraint. Finally, the surviving humans were corralled, trembling, vomiting, twitching, broken, but never dead. Regeneration pulsed visibly through their flesh, limbs knitting together even as they writhed. The pack lingered, savoring the rhythm, observing patterns, noting behaviors, testing responses to slight manipulations. Some humans had defiance left; those would feed future cycles of teaching. Others were reduced to compliance, used as study subjects for refining the hunt. Riven observed from the center, calm, calculating, sensing the pack's growing intelligence. They were no longer mere predators. They had become strategists, educators, manipulators of flesh, orchestrators of pain and renewal. Each hunt, each scream, each vomit, each regenerative pulse added to the pool of instinct, knowledge, and experience. The pack had learned, adapted, and evolved. The city outside was quiet. No one else moved, unaware of the horrors in the alleyways and ruins. But the pack could smell more prey in the distance, faint pulses waiting to enter the cycle. Riven knew instinctively that each human would provide lessons, each scream a rhythm to refine, each regenerative pulse a variable to manipulate. The eternal chase had expanded into a game of intelligence, instinct, and horror, everlasting, perfect in its cruelty. And the pack, guided by Riven, would continue to learn, adapt, and thrive, forever cycling through flesh, forever perfecting the eternal feast. The ruins smelled of iron and decay, thick with the scent of flesh being torn and reborn. Riven led the pack along the cracked streets, moving with a rhythm that had become second nature, each step measured, each twitch of a claw or tilt of the head intentional. Shard darted ahead, eyes glinting, nose twitching over scraps of scent. Maw followed, immense, deliberate, a crushing anchor to the pack's chaotic ballet. Feral offspring flitted between them, smaller, faster, twitching with awareness, learning patterns, memorizing rhythms, watching how Riven guided the hunt. The city had become their stage. Broken buildings and fractured streets were playgrounds, arenas, classrooms. Humans were scattered like fragile marionettes, every pulse and flinch a note in a symphony of pain and learning. But Riven was no longer concerned merely with feeding. Patterns were emerging, subtle, instructive, ritualized. Every hunt, every flinch, every scream fed the hierarchy, honed the instinct, and tightened the rhythm of the pack. The first humans stumbled into a narrow alley, clutching a broken metal pipe and trembling. Riven observed the pattern in their movement, hesitation followed by overcompensation, a rhythm of fear and defiance. Shard leapt ahead, teeth sinking into the thigh, dragging the prey into the open. Maw pinned the human against a shattered wall, jaws snapping at shoulders, tearing flesh that twitched and knitted itself in grotesque repetition. Feral offspring circled, testing angles of attack, experimenting with asymmetric bites. And then it happened. Something unplanned, unexpected. The alleyway partially collapsed, a shower of dust and concrete crashing down. One feral offspring staggered, claw scraping against stone, teeth grazing empty air. The human froze, wide-eyed, taking advantage of the moment, and for the first time Riven sensed hesitation ripple through the pack. Shard shifted, maw twisted, feral offspring recovered mid-fall. Within seconds, the chaos was controlled, the hunt resumed, and yet the moment left an indelible impression, a reminder that even a ritualized hunt was vulnerable to randomness. Riven's focus shifted to a smaller, trembling human pinned beneath debris. The pack had learned to manipulate regeneration, forcing flesh to knit imperfectly, organs to pulse grotesquely. The human's leg had been twisted in a previous feeding. Now, Riven guided Shard to bite along the thigh again, teeth sinking deep, tearing muscle that grew back misaligned. The human screamed, vomited, clawed at teeth, yet could not escape. Maw pressed against the torso, twisting the spine slightly, testing regenerative limits. Feral offspring bit at shoulders and arms, pulling, shredding, experimenting. The prey's body healed in chaotic, unpredictable patterns, limbs knitting wrong, organs bulging, skin puckering grotesquely. Rituals formed naturally. Riven circled, snapping at prey that resisted, repositioning others to control the rhythm. Shard and feral offspring mirrored movements instinctively, biting, twisting, repositioning, dragging, cornering. The humans became more than prey. They were data, patterns, experiments. Each scream, each twitch, each vomit was logged in primal memory, creating mental maps, feeding templates for future hunts. Eternal victims were no longer just food. They were livestock, essential to the ecosystem of horror. A sudden shriek split the air. A human who had been hiding in the rubble pulled out a camera, trying to record the feeding. It was Mara. Riven sensed the spike of intelligence immediately. Not survival instinct, not panic, curiosity. Obsession. A variable previously untested. The pack paused instinctively, analyzing the pattern, noting behavior. Mara did not flee, she observed. This was dangerous and fascinating. The pack adjusted, circling her with unpredictable patterns. Shards struck and retreated in rapid succession, nipping at limbs without fully committing, teasing the boundary of fear. Maw pressed from behind, anchoring subtly. Not killing but creating tension. Feral offspring flitted, experimenting with angles of attack that maximized terror without giving her opportunity to escape. Unexpected chaos erupted. A collapsed wall shifted mid-step, dust and bricks cascading down on the pack. One feral offspring was partially buried, claws scraping desperately, teeth snapping in blind rage. Mara screamed, camera smashing to the ground as she staggered back. Shard leapt, twisting in mid-air, sinking teeth into the smallest exposed portion of flesh. Maw pressed against her torso as debris fell, grinding bone and cloth into a chaotic tableau. The humans around her, other prey trapped in the eternal cycle, moaned and screamed, their regenerated limbs contorting, twitching grotesquely. The ritual had become theater, grotesque and unplanned, and yet Riven's mind absorbed every detail, adjusting the hunt instinctively. Rituals continued. Riven guided the pack to corner humans systematically, teaching the feral offspring subtle lessons. Bite here, twist there, pull drag, test regenerative limits. Humans flailed, vomited, vomit mixing with blood and dust in sickly clouds, but every misstep, every squeal, every twitch reinforced the pattern, feeding the pack's hierarchy and instinct. The most resilient humans, those who fought back, defied or observed like Marar, were catalogued mentally, earmarked for prolonged cycles, lessons in patience, terror, and adaptation. Others, weaker, predictable, or panicked, were devoured faster, but still regenerated, still fed the rhythmic cycle. A sudden unexpected event. One human stumbled backward into a pit of broken glass. Limbs shredded instantly, veins punctured, skin flayed to pulp. The regenerative pulse accelerated, flesh knitting in jagged, chaotic patterns. Shard leapt forward to tear at the torso as Maw twisted the spine, testing limits, controlling chaos. Feral offspring experimented with asymmetrical bites, pulling and twisting limbs to manipulate tissue as it reformed. The scream was horrific, metallic, tearing through dust and brick, echoing like a twisted drumbeat in the ruined square. Riven felt the subtle shift in rhythm, noting every variable, reinforcing the hierarchy of control. By now, the pack had developed subtle communication. Posture, tilt of the head, flex of claws, snap of jaws. They were teaching, experimenting, observing, responding to chaos. The eternal victims became living templates, their bodies a laboratory for instinct, strategy, and horror. Limbs regrew twisted, skin puckered in odd shapes, organs reformed with slight irregularities. The humans writhed, vomited, screamed, clawed, yet were trapped in endless cycles, part of a horrifying ecosystem orchestrated by the pack. Mara attempted another intervention, throwing rubble, slamming a metal beam, attempting to distract, confuse, or injure. Riven detected it all, sensing the spike of adrenaline, the pattern of obsession. Shard lunged unpredictably, nipping at hair and clothing, then retreating, teasing the human mind. Maw twisted the torso, forcing regeneration to create subtle misalignments. Feral offspring flitted, experimenting with angles, teeth sinking in unexpected places. Each action was a lesson in chaos management, an exercise in adapting ritual to unexpected behavior. Finally, the feeding concluded, for now. Humans were cornered, screaming, vomit-streaked, regenerating in grotesque cycles of agony and rebirth. Eternal victims moaned, twitching, already catalogued mentally by the pack for future cycles. Mara crouched, terrified, fascinated, obsessing, her eyes wide as the pack loomed, circling, snapping, testing, teaching. The ritual had become complete yet dynamic. a structured chaos that adapted to every unexpected variable. Riven observed from the center, calm, calculating. Patterns were catalogued, instincts refined, hierarchies reinforced. The pack had learned to manipulate regeneration, respond to human obsession, and exploit chaos without losing control. The eternal chase was no longer just survival. It was ritual, hierarchy, education, and terror. The city lay quiet beyond the immediate chaos, but the pack smelled more prey, more pulses, more potential lessons. Each scream, each twitch, each regenerative pulse was a thread in the intricate web of horror. The ritual would continue, evolving, teaching, perfecting the rhythm of the eternal feast. And Riven understood with primal clarity. The cycle would never end. The humans were bound, the pack was refined, and the rituals of feeding, observing, and manipulating flesh would continue, unpredictable, grotesque, and eternal. The city skeleton groaned under the weight of decay, its streets littered with debris, glass, and the twisted remnants of prior hunts. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, mingled with ash, dust, and the low hum of regenerative pulses. Riven moved at the head of the pack, every step precise, calculating. Shard darted like a jagged shadow across broken asphalt, nose twitching over scent trails, ears tilting to the slightest variation. Maw lumbered behind, massive, a constant pressure that controlled the rhythm of the hunt. Feral offspring flitted in and out, observing, experimenting, testing the limits of chaos and regeneration. Something was different today. Subtle at first, a twitch in the air, a faint rhythm in human movement, a spike in adrenaline that rolled like a pulse through the streets. The humans had begun to adapt. Mara's presence was no longer passive. She carried knowledge, curiosity, obsession. She wasn't hiding this time. She was watching, testing, interfering. Each decision she made was a puzzle for the pack to solve, a variable to exploit. The first human stumbled into a partially collapsed storefront. Terrified, trembling. Riven tilted his head, noting the irregular pattern in their movement. The pack reacted instantly, a synchronized blur of claws, teeth, and snapping jaws. Shard struck first, sinking teeth into a shoulder, pulling and twisting. Maw pressed against the torso, forcing the spine to twist unnaturally, organs pulsing grotesquely as the regenerative cycle attempted to heal what had been violently torn. Feral offspring experimented with asymmetric bites, pulling at limbs in ways that encouraged misaligned regeneration. Suddenly, Mara's interference escalated. She dropped a metal beam from above, aimed to crush a trapped human and disrupt the pack. The beam swung with a loud screech, narrowly missing Maw, smashing into rubble that buried two feral offspring partially under dust and debris. Riven's attention flicked to the chaos, instincts flaring. Shard lunged, clawing and snapping, extracting the trapped offspring. Maw twisted the beam slightly with its bulk, using the moment to pin the human even further. The smaller humans screamed, vomited, and twisted in synchronized horror, flesh knitting grotesquely, limbs bulging and misaligning, twitching with unnatural rhythm. This was the mutation phase. Feral offspring had begun experimenting instinctively, bites that altered the regenerative pattern in completely unexpected ways. One human's arm regenerated as a grotesque double limb. The second forearm fused partially to the torso, muscles twitching erratically. Another's face contorted mid-heel, jaw misaligning, eyes crossing and blinking asynchronously. The pack observed these mutations, cataloging them, testing responses. Chaos was no longer a threat, it was a tool. Mara advanced, moving deliberately, almost daring the pack to react. She grabbed a broken pipe and swung at Shard, whose reflexes were sharpened from countless hunts. Shard twisted mid-air, evading, snapping at Mara's wrist, drawing blood. The scream of pain. Her pain, foreign, intelligent, was a deliciously complex new variable. Maw pressed from behind, claws scraping concrete as it twisted a human torso further, forcing regenerative tissue to bulge in unpredictable ways. Feral offspring circled, tugging and biting, experimenting with angles, forcing asymmetric regeneration in arms and legs, inverting joints, creating grotesque deformities with each pull and twist. Then came the truly unexpected. A human attempted to flee through a side alley, only to stumble upon a trapped neighbor, previously unconscious, half buried under rubble. The feral offspring pounced instinctively, teeth sinking into both humans at once, limbs tangling, skin tearing, sinew snapping. Regeneration pulsed chaotically, misalignments compounding, one arm fused to another human's leg, organs reckoning across bodies in horrific contortions. Mara screamed, stumbled back, trying to process the spectacle, her obsession now feeding into the pack's calculation. Riven's mind pulsed with primal clarity. Every mutation, every misalignment, every new scream was data. Feral offspring learned mirrored movements, tested regenerative patterns, perfected their understanding of the chaos they were creating. Shard experimented with bite angles on Mara herself, testing limits of her response. Fear, curiosity, flinching, defiance, each a note in the symphony of hunting and learning. Unexpectedly, the air trembled with a new variable. A small explosion from a trapped gas line ignited, flames licking at the edges of the alley. The humans panicked violently, some thrashing into debris, others vomiting or clawing at regenerated flesh. Feral offspring reacted instantly, leaping over flames, claws scraping against brick, teeth tearing. Shard twisted, sinking deep into a shoulder, tugging and twisting, forcing regenerating tissue to knit imperfectly. Maw pressed with calculated pressure, twisting spines, forcing limbs to align wrong, organs to bulge, skin to pucker grotesquely. Mara tried to act, throwing herself between prey and pack, swinging rubble and debris in frantic arcs. One offspring lunged, biting into her forearm, pulling, twisting, tugging. Shard snapped at her legs, forcing her to stumble backward over twisted human limbs. Maw pressed a knee into her torso, not enough to kill, just enough to enforce chaos, to make the pulse of regeneration writhe unpredictably. The humans around her screamed, vomited, limbs bulging, regenerating wild patterns, forearms fused to torsos, ribs overlapping with organs that pulsed visibly beneath torn flesh. Feral offspring had begun experimenting at random with bites and tearing patterns, introducing new mutations without guidance. A human's leg regenerated with a secondary knee joint, protruding at a grotesque angle. Another's hand grew with additional fingers, fused together mid-heel, twitching independently. The pack observed these mutations, cataloging every oddity, every new pattern, learning instinctively how to exploit or expand them. Suddenly Mara screamed in comprehension, or terror. She understood something the others did not. The pack was not just feeding. They were learning. Every mutation, every reaction, every human variable contributed to the pack's intelligence. Riven's gaze locked on her for the first time, calculating, testing, exploiting. Shard circled, teeth snapping near her legs, retreating and striking again in unpredictable patterns. Maw twisted a nearby prey's torso, forcing regeneration to create new deformities that Mara could not anticipate. Feral offspring darted, tugged, and bit at angles she did not expect, teaching her the unpredictable nature of their world. Then the truly chaotic moment. A wall, weakened by prior collapses, gave way entirely, sending bricks and dust cascading into the street. One feral offspring was buried under rubble, clawing and biting to escape. Another human tumbled into the chaos, limbs tangled with a regenerating neighbor. Shard lunged from above, sinking teeth into the twisted, writhing mass, while Maw pressed against the heap, twisting, crushing, forcing tissue to knit in bizarre, chaotic patterns. Mara screamed again, her voice a strange intelligent variable in the pack's growing database. By now, the mutations had escalated beyond predictable grotesque forms. Humans were twisted, regenerated incorrectly, grotesque parodies of their former selves, moaning in perpetual agony, writhing in unpredictable rhythms. The pack observed every reaction, every flinch, every scream, noting which manipulations forced the most unpredictable regeneration, which behaviors enhanced chaos, which variables could be exploited repeatedly. Finally, the chaos subsided, not by design but by exhaustion of variables. Humans lay twitching, vomit-streaked, regenerated grotesquely, some fused with others in horrifying configurations. Mara crouched, terrified, obsessing, eyes wide, calculating, observing. The pack circled, snapping, testing minor reactions, cataloging mental templates of every variable, every scream, every flint. The rituals of feeding, mutation, and chaos had reached a new level. Riven stood at the center, calm, calculating. The pack had mutated, adapted, learned, evolved. They could manipulate regeneration, exploit chaos, and respond to human intelligence. The eternal cycle was no longer just feeding, it was teaching, experimenting, perfecting. Mara's obsession had inadvertently made her part of the ecosystem, a dangerous new variable that would ensure the pack's understanding of unpredictability expanded. And Riven knew with primal clarity. The mutations, the chaos, the unpredictable variables would continue. Humans would regenerate, mutate, and scream. The pack would learn, adapt, and perfect the eternal feast. No rules, no mercy, no end. The city lay in uneasy quiet. But each pulse of regeneration, each grotesque twitch of mutated limbs, each scream, was a thread in the endless, horrifying cycle. And the pack, guided by Riven, would continue to evolve, to experiment, to feast, forever. The outskirts of the city reeked of desperation. Broken streets twisted between abandoned buildings, half-collapsed warehouses, and scattered remnants of civilization. From their vantage in the shadows, the pack moved silently, a living wave of sinew and instinct. Riven led, muscles coiled, senses stretched taut. The smell of humans was sharper here. Greed, fear, confusion, curiosity, each aroma layered atop the other, distinct and intoxicating. Mara and Victor were no ordinary prey. They carried tools, knowledge, and a sense of self-importance that made them unpredictable variables. Riven observed them first, noting patterns in their movement. Hesitant steps, sudden jerks, hands raised instinctively, eyes darting. Shard flitted ahead, circling, testing reactions with nips at empty space, just close enough to provoke flinches without committing. Maw pressed forward, a looming shadow of muscle and teeth, keeping the pack's rhythm controlled. Feral offspring scattered in erratic loops, experimenting with angles, observing, mimicking, cataloging. Victor led, waving a flashlight erratically, its beam cutting across broken concrete, revealing a human knee twisted strangely from prior feeding. Mara crouched low, camera in hand, documenting movements, whispering calculations. The pack's instincts registered their intelligence immediately. Unlike previous prey, these two attempted to manipulate the hunt, to test the boundaries, to toy with chaos itself. And chaos, Riven realized, could be exploited. A sudden shift. Victor dropped a small vial, shattering it. The smell of chemical reagents hit the air. Shard twitched, claws scraping, teeth snapping at the unexpected new aroma. Riven adjusted position, guiding Maw to press against Victor, forcing him to stumble toward the broken concrete, limbs twisting in grotesque anticipation. The feral offspring lunged at Mara's feet, forcing her to step backward, losing balance on uneven rubble. Victor's panic became a rhythm the pack could manipulate. Each flinch, each overcorrection, each desperate grab at Mara's arm, became an instrument of teaching. Shard leapt unpredictably, teeth grazing the wrist, pulling, testing the limits of her reflexes. Maw twisted Victor's torso gently, enough to pull his shoulder out of alignment, watching the pulse of regeneration respond in jagged waves. Feral offspring experimented on a human twisted limb, pulling and chewing at angles designed to force a symmetrical healing. Mara's camera shattered on the ground during a sudden twist. She lunged to grab it, exposing a forearm and hand. Shard pounced, teeth sinking deep, pulling in a jerking rhythm that forced the flesh to bulge, tear, and knit in jagged patterns. Maw pressed down, twisting subtly, bones moving wrong, organs pulsing visibly beneath newly reformed skin. Victor screamed, stumbling over debris, tripping into a puddle of regrown gore from previous victims. The regenerative cycle, forced into chaos, became more grotesque with every interaction. The pack communicated silently, head tilts, subtle shifts, a snap of a jaw. Chaos became ritual. The humans' intelligence, their attempts at strategy, created opportunities for the pack to experiment, to teach, to reinforce hierarchy. Mara tried to shove a feral offspring away, but it twisted around her, teeth grazing ribs, forcing her to stumble backward. Shard circled, snapping, retreating, snapping again, testing reactions, cataloging patterns. Maw pressed Victor's back against a jagged wall, twisting, forcing regeneration to create bizarre misalignments. Unexpectedly, a weak wall section collapsed nearby, sending a cascade of bricks and dust into the alley. Two feral offspring were buried partially, claws and teeth scraping frantically. Mara screamed, tripping over debris. Shard leapt into the chaos, twisting midair, sinking teeth into Victor's shoulder. Maw pressed from behind, forcing him onto his back, watching as muscles and organs knit in unpredictable forms. Limbs twisted, skin puckered, and previously injured tissue regenerated in grotesque, chaotic patterns. The humans attempted a coordinated escape, Mara dragging Victor by his arm, but the pack adapted instinctively. Riven's mind calculated every angle. Feral offspring intercepted, nipping at ankles, tugging, forcing limbs to bend wrong. Shard lunged unpredictably at the torso, teeth sinking into regenerated flesh. Maw pressed heavy, twisting slightly to enhance misalignment, maximizing both pain and the grotesque outcomes of regeneration. Humans screamed, vomited, and twisted in agony, each movement a teaching tool for the pack. Then came the truly unexpected. Victor attempted to grab a previously regenerated human limb, trying to use it as a weapon or shield. The pack froze momentarily, analyzing this variable. Shard bit into the hand, pulling, while feral offspring twisted the wrist, forcing regeneration into impossible angles. Victor screamed, twisting to free himself, inadvertently pulling Mara into the same grotesque tangle. Maw pressed down, using sheer mass to twist torsos, forcing tissue to knit chaotically. The pack's hierarchy reinforced itself through this chaos. Riven guided movements, subtle but precise, while Shard and feral offspring executed instinctively. Every mutation, every forced regeneration, every flinch from humans became a template, a teaching moment. Mara's obsession, her calculated observation, was catalogued as a new layer of unpredictability, something to manipulate, to explore, to integrate into the pack's evolving strategy. Finally, the chaos reached a temporary pause. Humans lay twisted, regenerated grotesquely, bodies twitching with continuous cycles. Mara crouched, wide-eyed, obsessing over every detail, calculating, frightened, fascinated. Victor moaned, limbs fused wrong, organs bulging, skin puckering grotesquely. The pack circled, snapping jaws, testing minor reactions, reinforcing patterns. Chaos had become ritual, intelligence a variable, and the regenerative cycle more grotesque, more twisted than ever. Riven stood at the center, calm and calculating. The humans were not merely prey. They were ingredients, manipulable, interactive, evolving under the pack's instinctive guidance. Each scream, twitch, and vomit pulse was catalogued, teaching the pack subtle lessons about manipulation, adaptation, and control. The eternal feast was no longer mere sustenance. It was a laboratory, a game, a grotesque art form perfected through chaos and observation. The city beyond the alley lay quiet, but the sense of more humans, greedy, fearful, confused, drifted faintly on the wind. The pack would continue, evolving, experimenting, and manipulating the regenerative cycle with increasing complexity, using intelligence and chaos alike. And in the center of it all, Riven observed, orchestrated, and catalogued, the heartbeat of the cycle, the eternal feast, the cycle of flesh. The streets beyond the alleyways had become a maze of terror and decay, a canvas for the pack's evolving ritual. Riven led, each step deliberate, sensing every shift in scent, every vibration in broken concrete. The feral offspring scuttled along walls and over debris, twitching with awareness, eyes tracking every human pulse. Shard moved like a jagged shadow, teeth glinting, claws scraping concrete, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Maw pressed behind, a mountain of muscle, a constant force that controlled the rhythm of the hunt. Humans had begun to understand the cycle, to manipulate it, to interact with it, but they were predictable in their overconfidence. Mara and Victor had brought tools, chemicals, and a faint spark of intellect that the pack now studied as both threat and entertainment. The regenerative cycle had evolved under the pack's guidance, and now Riven sought to push it further, to manipulate humans into becoming ingredients for each other, turning fear and desperation into grotesque innovation. The first human encountered was a scavenger, trembling, carrying a small satchel of scavenged supplies. Riven tilted his head, noting the twitch of panic in their movements, the uneven rhythm of breathing. Feral offspring darted forward, teeth grazing the calf, pulling and releasing. Shard snapped at a shoulder, tugging and twisting to test the limits of regeneration. Maw pressed against the torso, forcing misaligned tissue to knit grotesquely. The human screamed, vomited, limbs twitching in chaotic asymmetrical ways, already partially reformed from prior cycles. Riven's mind shifted, directing the pack to manipulate the human's interactions with another nearby prey. The scavenger's regenerated arm was forced against the chest of a previously captured human, blending tissue in unnatural ways. Shard lunged repeatedly, teeth sinking into both, pulling and twisting in calculated rhythms. Feral offspring experimented on a leg, biting at joints, forcing the regenerative cycle to create secondary knees, fused fingers, twisted ribs. The humans writhed in unending cycles of agony and renewal, screams echoing across fractured streets. Then Mara appeared, dragging Victor behind her, attempting to intervene, to manipulate outcomes. Shard lunged at her, testing reflexes, teeth sinking into forearm and retreating, then striking again unpredictably. Ma pressed Victor's torso into the rubble, twisting subtly, forcing organs to realign incorrectly, limbs knitting into grotesque, chaotic forms. The human's own regenerated limbs now became instruments of further torment. Their bodies were turned against each other, forced into unnatural positions, feeding the pack's hierarchy and experimentation. A sudden collapse, a weakened wall buckling, sent a cloud of dust and brick cascading down. 2 feral offspring were buried momentarily, claws scraping frantically, teeth snapping blindly. Mara screamed, stumbling, trying to reposition, unaware that Riven had anticipated her moves. Shard twisted mid-air, sinking teeth into a twisted human torso, pulling, manipulating tissue to bulge and misalign. Ma pressed down on another human, twisting subtly, forcing regeneration to continue its grotesque evolution. Limbs twisted, skin puckered, and organs bulged irregularly as the humans writhed in infinite cycles. Victor attempted to grab a previously regenerated limb to defend himself. The pack froze for a split second, analyzing the variable. Shard bit the limb, pulling and twisting while feral offspring experimented on joints and organs, forcing regeneration to create impossible deformity. Victor's scream intertwined with Mara's cries, feeding the pack with patterns of intelligence, curiosity, and panic to study and exploit. The pack then introduced a new layer of cruelty, forcing humans to interact with each other as ingredients in the cycle. One regenerated arm was pressed against another's chest, a twisted leg forced into the abdomen of a separate victim. The regenerative pulses spread, knitting grotesque new forms, bulging tissue, misaligned limbs, twisted organs. The humans screamed and vomited, but their attempts to resist created further variables to teach the feral offspring, strengthening hierarchy and pattern recognition. Unexpected chaos erupted. A burst of toxic gas from a broken canister ignited with a spark, flames licking across the alley. Humans panicked violently, staggering, claws scratching walls, limbs twisting. Feral offspring reacted instantly, leaping over flames, teeth sinking, pulling, manipulating. Shard lunged mid-air at Victor, sinking teeth into shoulders and dragging across the torso. Ma pressed from behind, twisting spines, forcing regeneration to knit organs and flesh in unpredictable grotesque formations. Mara screamed, dropping to her knees, scrambling backward across broken debris, exposed to gnashing teeth, and pulsing regenerated flesh. Every action of humans became an experimental variable. Attempts to fight, flee, or manipulate the pack were catalogued in primal memory. Shard's lunges, Ma's twisting pressure, feral offspring's experimental bites created an evolving symphony of grotesque mutation. Limbs fused, fingers doubled, organs shifted mid-pulse, and previously healed tissue tore anew under controlled force, then reknit into nightmarish shapes. Each human became both a participant and a lesson in the chaos-driven ritual of the pack. Mara's intelligence and obsession elevated her as the most dangerous variable. She tried to push regenerated humans against each other to create chaos for the pack. But Riven anticipated, guiding Shard and Ma to manipulate outcomes, turning her plan against her. Twisted limbs, fused torsos, bulging organs created a tableau of horror and grotesque innovation. Feral offspring experimented with bite angles on Mara's arms and legs, pulling, twisting, forcing regenerative errors in unpredictable ways. Then another unpredictable moment. Victor, in desperation, tripped and fell onto a pile of already regenerated humans, inadvertently causing limbs to entangle in grotesque ways. Shard leapt, sinking teeth into the mass of flesh. Feral offspring followed, tugging and twisting. Ma pressed from above. Limbs twisted into impossible positions, organs realigned incorrectly, skin puckered grotesquely. Mara screamed, clawing at the pile, trying to extract Victor only to be caught in the mass of regenerated, writhing flesh. The pack's ritual became fully symbiotic with the chaos. Humans were ingredients, their regenerative pulses feeding a grotesque cycle of horror. Limbs became instruments, organs tools, and screams a rhythm to perfect hierarchy. Feral offspring learned rapidly, observing Riven's subtle instructions and experimenting independently, creating new mutations, refining strategies, cataloging patterns. The pack had achieved a grotesque harmony of manipulation, chaos, and ritualized feeding. Finally, Exhaustion overtook the immediate chaos. Humans were sprawled, regenerated grotesquely, fused in unnatural positions, moaning, twitching, vomiting. Mara crouched, wide-eyed, obsessing, her intelligence catalogued as a dangerous variable. Victor groaned, twisted, organs bulging through misaligned skin. The pack circled, snapping, nudging, twisting minor limbs, reinforcing the grotesque lessons. The regenerative cycle had evolved, no longer mere feeding, but a ritual of exploitation, teaching, and grotesque symbiosis. Riven observed, calm, calculating. Each scream, twitch, and vomit pulse was data. The humans were no longer just prey, they were ingredients in an evolving eternal feast. The pack had perfected manipulation, chaos, and regenerative horror, and the cycle would continue indefinitely. The city beyond lay quiet, but the pulse of grotesque life and mutation would ripple through it endlessly. The city had become a feeding ground unlike any before. Cracked streets, overturned cars, shattered buildings, and collapsed bridges formed an intricate maze of opportunity, chaos, and endless prey. Riven moved at the forefront, senses stretched taut, absorbing every scent, vibration, and pulse. The pack followed, an extension of his instincts, moving in concert like an organism of sinew, claws, and teeth. Shard darted ahead, twisting through debris, eyes glinting, claws scraping over concrete, teeth glinting in anticipation. Maw, massive and unyielding, pressed behind, controlling the tempo of the hunt. Feral offspring flitted along walls, across rooftops, experimenting with angles, memorizing rhythms, testing the limits of humans' regenerative patterns. From the pack's perspective, humans were no longer individuals. They were nodes in an intricate web, ingredients in a grotesque ecosystem. Every flinch, every heartbeat, every gasp of pain fed patterns, teaching lessons. Eternal victims wandered the streets, regenerating and twitching, limbs knitting in malformed chaotic ways. Their moans created an eerie symphony, a backdrop for the pack's dance of terror. Humans tried to resist, to run, to organize, but the pack anticipated every move. Riven had internalized the city, every crack, every alley, every hollow building a tool to manipulate, corner, and feed. A group of survivors stumbled from a crumbling apartment block, weapons drawn. Their fear was palpable, thick in the air, mixing with the iron scent of blood from previously regenerated humans. Shard darted forward, testing their reflexes with nips at ankles, retreats, feints, drawing panic like a conductor drawing out notes in a symphony. Maw pressed forward, massive shoulders colliding with debris, forcing one human to fall into a twisted pile of regenerating corpses. Feral offspring swarmed unpredictably, leaping over rubble, twisting midair, sinking teeth into exposed flesh, pulling and twisting, forcing regeneration into grotesque, asymmetrical forms. The humans tried to organize a barricade, slamming doors and debris together. But the pack's coordination was perfect, unspoken communication in posture, head tilt, flex of claws. Shard and feral offspring exploited gaps, slipping between cracks, gnashing at limbs, pulling at clothing and exposed flesh. Maw used sheer weight to collapse partially intact walls onto fleeing humans, forcing rapid regenerative pulses that twisted flesh and contorted organs into horrific new alignments. Every scream, every flinch, every vomit-laden gasp was a lesson, catalogued, integrated, and manipulated by the pack's collective instincts. Riven shifted attention to an eternal victim, a human trapped for cycles upon cycles, limbs twisted from repeated feeding. He guided Shard to bite in a novel pattern, pulling at shoulder and neck, while feral offspring experimented on lower limbs, twisting knees backward and forcing regrowth in malformed angles. The human screams pierced the ruins, metallic and raw, echoing against fractured walls. Regeneration pulsed, organs realigning, tissue bulging in grotesque, chaotic forms. The pack observed as though in awe. This was not feeding. This was evolution, experimentation, ritualized horror. A sudden collapse of a building sent a cascade of debris across a street. Humans panicked, running into streets lined with the twisted, regenerating victims of previous cycles. Shard twisted mid-air, sinking teeth into the neck of one fleeing human, jerking and twisting to force regenerative misalignments. Maw pressed down on another, shifting weight to tear at regenerating flesh, forcing organs into malformed orientations. Feral offspring flitted across rooftops, leaping down unpredictably, teeth sinking into exposed limbs, pulling and twisting in synchronized chaos. Humans tried a desperate counterattack, a Molotov cocktail rolled into the street. Flames erupted, licking over broken concrete and twitching bodies. Smoke choked the air. Panic rippled outward. But the pack adapted instantly. Shard leapt over flames, sinking teeth into a flailing arm. Ma pressed down on Victor, twisting torso, forcing regeneration in grotesque, misaligned pulses. Feral offspring pulled at limbs, dragging humans into alleys, into collapsed buildings, into tight spaces where regeneration contorted flesh in impossible ways. Flames licked at arms and legs, yet regenerative pulses healed, twisted and deformed simultaneously. The chaos became ritualized, a citywide symphony of agony and renewal. Riven observed Mara moving through the chaos with her obsessive curiosity intact. She tried to record, to study, to manipulate variables, dragging Victor through the madness. The pack responded to her intelligence differently. They experimented, teased, and forced her to witness the eternal cycle firsthand. Shard nipped at exposed forearms, retreating, twisting unpredictably. Ma pressed Victor into a twisted pile of regenerated humans, forcing organs and limbs into grotesque alignment. Feral offspring tested angles, experimenting with bites, pulling flesh, forcing regeneration in chaotic permutations. Every move Mara made was studied, exploited, and integrated into the pack's evolving hierarchy. Suddenly, from the chaos of a collapsed street, an unexpected variable emerged. A human had found a partially intact elevator shaft, and attempted to jump, using the open shaft as escape. The pack reacted instantly. Shard lunged mid-leap, teeth sinking into an arm, dragging the human back into the chaos. Ma pressed from behind, twisting torso, forcing regenerative misalignments as the human's scream echoed down the shaft. Feral offspring flitted unpredictably, pulling at legs, arms, and torso. The body knit in grotesque malformed ways, organs misaligning, limbs contorting, skin puckering grotesquely. Every movement, every scream, every twist fed the pack's instinctual memory, creating templates for future chaos. The city's ecosystem had become fully alive. Buildings, streets, humans, regenerated victims, the pack, all interconnected in an evolving, grotesque organism. Eternal victims moved in semi-patterned chaos, their regenerative cycles feeding the rhythm, providing constant stimuli for the pack. Mara and Victor's attempts at resistance, observation, and manipulation became additional variables in the ecosystem, teaching the pack new ways to manipulate humans' regenerative responses. At one point, a partially regenerated victim collapsed onto another, limbs entangling in grotesque new ways. Shard seized the opportunity, sinking teeth into the back, twisting flesh as feral offspring tugged at legs, forcing regeneration into unpredictable misalignments. Ma pressed down, weight driving twisted torsos together. Mara screamed as she tried to intervene, arms flailing, only to be nudged into another pile of regenerating humans. Her attempts at resistance were catalogued, studied, exploited, and turned against her. The pack's coordination evolved. Riven moved like the city itself, anticipating variables, adjusting instinctively. Shard and feral offspring became extensions of his will, responding instantaneously to Mara's movements, to humans' panic, to debris collapses, to fires erupting unpredictably. Ma provided constant pressure, a grounding force, ensuring chaos never devolved into inefficiency. Every bite, pull, twist, and press forced regeneration into grotesque, malformed patterns that reinforced hierarchy, taught the feral offspring, and refined instinct. By the time the sun dipped behind the shattered skyline, the city had become an endless labyrinth of regenerating horror. Limbs fused, organs shifted, skin puckered, and screams echoed endlessly. Mara crouched among them, wide-eyed, horrified, obsessively observing. Victor groaned, twisted and mangled, organs bulging grotesquely. Eternal victims writhed endlessly, feeding the pack's rhythm. The streets themselves had become living instruments, the city a grotesque ecosystem, orchestrated entirely by the pack's instincts. Riven paused at the center of the chaos, surveying the full scope. Humans were ingredients, eternal victims were livestock, and the city was alive with regenerative pulses and screams. The pack had achieved perfect coordination, teaching, experimentation, and ritualized feeding. Chaos had become order, horror had become ritual, and the regenerative cycle had evolved into a grotesque symphony of manipulation, observation, and eternal consumption. From his perspective, the cycle would never end. The city itself would continue to feed, mutate, regenerate, and teach. Every human scream, every twitch, every grotesque regenerative misalignment was a pulse in the living heartbeat of the pack's ecosystem. Riven understood fully. They were no longer merely predators. They were the architects of an eternal feast, a city transformed into a grotesque organism of flesh, chaos, and endless renewal. The city throbbed with life, or unlife, a grotesque heartbeat of regenerative pulses and perpetual screams. Riven led the pack through streets littered with corpses half-healed, bodies fused in unnatural ways, organs bulging through skin that had knitted wrong. Eternal victims moaned, twitched, vomited, and screamed in endless rhythm, feeding patterns, teaching lessons, refining instinct. Mara moved cautiously among them, eyes wide, documenting, studying, absorbing every detail, unaware that she was now a variable the pack would exploit as much as any human ingredient. Riven's senses were attuned to everything. The trembling of human limbs, the pulse of adrenaline, the subtle variations in regenerative patterns, the scent of fear mixed with the copper tang of blood. Shard flitted ahead, teeth glinting, claws scraping concrete, striking limbs here, pulling flesh there, teaching feral offspring the art of chaos. Ma pressed from behind, a mountain of muscle, twisting torsos, crushing spines, forcing regeneration to take grotesque, malformed paths. Feral offspring darted unpredictably, experimenting with bite angles, pulling, twisting, and testing regenerative thresholds. The first humans encountered were a small group of survivors holed up in a fractured skyscraper. They tried to barricade themselves, stacking furniture, clinging to broken walls, wielding makeshift weapons. But the pack moved as one, analyzing patterns of panic, hesitation, and defiance. Shard leapt through broken glass, sinking teeth into a shoulder, tugging, twisting, forcing regeneration into jagged, chaotic forms. Ma pressed a torso against a collapsed wall, twisting subtly, forcing organs and limbs to knit in grotesque misalignment. Feral offspring flitted between gaps, biting, pulling, twisting, dragging humans into alleyways where regenerated victims writhed like living scaffolds. Riven sensed Mara's presence immediately. Her intelligence, her obsession, her curiosity. Unlike the other humans, she did not flee, she observed. Her calculated risks, her attempts to manipulate the environment made her dangerous. Shard darted close, nipping at forearms and calves without committing fully, testing her reflexes, her patterns, teaching the feral offspring to anticipate the variable. Ma pressed Victor, twisting torso, forcing regeneration to create malformed tissue and organs. Feral offspring experimented with novel bites, pulling, twisting, forcing regeneration to create unpredictable, grotesque mutations. Suddenly, the unexpected happened. A gas leak ignited in a nearby street, flames erupting and consuming debris and regenerating victims alike. Shard twisted midair, leaping through fire, sinking teeth into flailing flesh, pulling, forcing regenerative distortions in exposed limbs. Ma pressed against Victor, twisting as heat licked at skin, forcing grotesque pulses of malformed regeneration. Feral offspring darted over fire, dragging limbs into new positions, testing limits of pain, chaos, and regeneration. Mara shrieked, scrambling, observing, documenting, caught in the evolving nightmare that was no longer just a hunt. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of flesh. The pack then experimented further. Humans were forced to interact with each other as temporary ingredients. Limbs were pressed against torsos of other victims, bodies fused into chaotic scaffolds. Regeneration twisted flesh, organs bulged, skin puckered grotesquely, and screams layered over screams. The pack observed, teaching, adjusting, cataloging, reinforcing hierarchy. Each new configuration created lessons for feral offspring and reinforced Riven's instinctual control over the cycle. Mara, desperate to intervene, tried to manipulate a newly trapped human into attacking a previously regenerated victim. But Riven anticipated her moves, guiding Shard and Ma to exploit her actions, turning her cleverness against her. Her limbs were grazed by teeth, pulled, twisted in a constant demonstration of the pack's dominance and intelligence. Every scream, every twitch, every desperate clawing was absorbed into the pack's evolving ritual. Then another variable, a survivor attempted to hide in the wreckage of a partially collapsed bridge. Shard lunged mid-leap, teeth sinking into an arm, dragging the human down into the chaos. Ma pressed from behind, twisting torso, forcing regeneration into malformed asymmetrical pulses. Feral offspring darted unpredictably, experimenting with angles, pulling at limbs, forcing organs and flesh to knit into grotesque, chaotic formations. The humans' screams echoed off broken steel and concrete, feeding the pack's memory, refining teaching patterns and enhancing hierarchy. The city itself became an active participant. Fire, smoke, collapsing walls, twisted metal, all variables integrated into the pack's hunting patterns. Eternal victims became tools, instruments, scaffolds for grotesque manipulation. Limbs fused, organs shifted, skin puckered, and twisted torsos writhed endlessly. Mara moved cautiously, documenting, observing, trying to preserve humanity in the middle of chaos, but every step she took was anticipated, exploited, and fed into the ritual. Finally, Riven felt a shift within himself. Repeated exposure to regenerative cycles, constant observation of eternal victims, and interaction with humans like Mara had created a subtle evolution. He was no longer merely instinct-driven. He could perceive patterns in the cycle beyond immediate survival, beyond feeding. There was an awareness, semi-conscious, primal yet deliberate. The pack sensed it, adjusting, experimenting with more complex feeding arrangements, exploiting regenerative cycles in more intricate, grotesque ways. Mara tried to escape through a narrow street, dragging Victor behind her, but the pack had already transformed it into a corridor of horror. Shard darted unpredictably, teeth sinking into arms, legs, torsos, pulling, twisting, forcing regeneration into chaotic new permutations. Feral offspring flitted along walls and rooftops, experimenting with angles and techniques, nudging limbs, repositioning torsos, creating new grotesque forms. Maw pressed down, twisting, forcing organs and tissue to align in misaligned, horrifying patterns. The city echoed with screams, vomit, regenerative pulses, and chaotic movement. By the end of the cycle, the city had become a grotesque living ecosystem. Buildings were lined with twitching, regenerating corpses, streets filled with fused, malformed limbs, organs bulging grotesquely, skin puckering and tearing with new pulses. Mara crouched, wide-eyed, obsessing over every detail, every pulse, every scream. Victor lay mangled, partially fused with another eternal victim, organs bulging, limbs twisted. Eternal victims writhed endlessly, feeding the pack's hierarchy, teaching feral offspring, and evolving grotesque regeneration. Riven observed the entirety, understanding fully. The pack was no longer a mere predator. The city itself was now an extension of their will, a living, breathing organism of flesh, chaos, and perpetual regeneration. Humans had become ingredients, eternal victims were both livestock and scaffolds, and the regenerative cycle had evolved into a grotesque symphony of manipulation, observation, and feeding. The line between predator and ecosystem had blurred entirely. The cycle had seemed eternal, the pulse of flesh and regeneration unbroken. The screams echoed endlessly, a macabre symphony of agony and rebirth, feeding the pack's instincts, refining hierarchies, and reinforcing ritualized feeding patterns. Riven watched over it all, sensing himself as conductor, architect, and apex of the cycle, and yet a strange, subtle disturbance rippled beneath the surface. Something unpredictable. Something uncharted. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. First it was the humans. Their regenerative pulses slowed. Twitches that had once been rhythmic, precise, grotesque, now staggered. Limbs that should have knitted cleanly or twisted into horrifying asymmetries faltered mid-growth, jerking like broken marionettes. Eyes blinked sluggishly, their formerly eternal glow dimming. Screams that had been constant and metallic now came in irregular bursts, ragged, weak, uncertain. Mara's camera clattered to the ground as she tried to move, and her limbs shook, not from fear, but from the impossible sensation of failing regeneration. The eternal victims' bodies, once ceaseless laboratories of flesh, began to stagnate. Riven sensed it immediately. The pack paused instinctively, a rare hesitation rippling through muscles, claws, teeth, and bone. Shard tilted her head, eyes narrowing. Maw shifted, massive weight pressing against the pavement, flexing claws. Feral offspring twitched, uncertain, sniffing, circling the humans in patterns that now felt wrong. The pulse of regenerative energy, the very rhythm that had guided every hunt, every experiment, every ritual, was failing. For the first time, chaos was no longer a tool the pack controlled. It became a threat. A tremor ran through the city as human screams faltered, as regenerative flesh hesitated, as the grotesque, malformed patterns of organs, limbs, and skin began to unravel. Victims writhed in pain, not renewed but deteriorating, tissues collapsing into themselves. Limbs that had been twisted and fused began to tear spontaneously. Organs shriveled, and skin split in slow, agonizing spirals. Riven's instincts screamed to adapt, to bite, to twist, to feed, but the very mechanism of regeneration was failing. Mara screamed, scrambling through the twisted streets, dragging Victor behind her. But her attempts at manipulation, at clever observation, no longer mattered. Her regenerative rhythm stuttered and failed. She clawed at walls, at rubble, at the twitching, breaking corpses around her, and for the first time she felt the unthinkable: mortality. Humans who had been eternal, trapped in endless cycles, now wavered on the edge of finality. And then the pack itself began to falter. Shard's leaps grew clumsy, teeth snapping ineffectively. Maw's crushing pressure became imprecise. Torsos slipped through massive jaws, teeth clashing against misaligned bones. Feral offspring staggered, claws scraping against rubble, bodies twitching spasmodically. Riven felt a nausea he had never known, an instinctual panic that no ritual, no hierarchy, could reconcile. The regenerative pulse that had nourished them all, that had woven humans, pack, and city into a grotesque ecosystem, was unraveling. It began with tremors, tiny spasms of bone, muscle, and sinew. The city itself seemed to shiver with the failure of the eternal cycle. Walls groaned, debris shifted, the air thick with the smell of decay and failure. Humans that had been bound in intricate patterns of grotesque fusion began to collapse. Organs slumped, limbs tore free, skin sagged and split. Even Riven's semi-conscious understanding of the cycle could not compensate. His own body shuddered, twitching involuntarily, instincts screaming into an abyss of uncertainty. Shard gave a high-pitched wail, a sound unlike any scream she had ever made, a note of panic, terror, and confusion. Maw lurched forward and collapsed onto a pile of regenerating victims, twitching, convulsing, unable to control limbs that no longer obeyed instinct. Feral offspring scattered, twisting, jerking, eyes darting in blind horror as the once perfect hierarchy dissolved into chaos. The pack's coordination faltered, leaving holes, gaps, mistakes. Predators who could no longer predict the actions of their prey or their own kin. Mara watched, horror rooting her to the spot as the city dissolved into an unimaginable tableau. Victims ceased regenerating entirely, their bodies becoming grotesque mounds of shattered tissue, fused and broken, twitching in final, imperfect spasms. Entire buildings were lined with inert forms, limbs mangled beyond recognition. Blood clotted in unnatural patterns, dark and sticky, mingling with debris, dust, and shattered brick. The air was thick with a silence that felt wrong, heavy, pressing, a pause in the symphony of eternal screams. Riven moved through the chaos, instinct screaming for control, for feeding, for ritual. But there was nothing left to control. The humans, the eternal victims, the city, the ritualized patterns, all collapsed into decay. The pack's instinctual rhythm unraveled. Teeth snapped against air, hands tore at rubble, yet no satisfaction followed. A strange emptiness filled the void once occupied by screams and regeneration, a void that even Riven felt pressing into his consciousness. Then Mara did the unthinkable. She approached the pack, dragging herself across broken limbs and debris, trembling, eyes wide with comprehension. She reached out, not to strike, not to flee, not to manipulate, but to touch the twitching form of Shard. Her fingers brushed against the rotting skin and muscle, and something almost impossible happened. A flicker of recognition passed through Riven, a semi-conscious understanding that the cycle itself had failed, and that nothing, not bite, not claw, not ritual, could restore it. For the first time, the predators felt the absence of prey, the absence of cycle. Riven froze, watching Shard collapse entirely, Maw twitch into stillness, feral offspring convulsing and collapsing one after another. The city, once alive with regenerative horror, screams and ritual, fell silent, a corpse beneath the sky. Mara's breathing echoed above the twitching, failing forms around her. Human and zombie alike were suspended in the aftermath of a cycle broken, the eternal feast extinguished. And then, unexpectedly, the city itself seemed to mourn, or perhaps simply release the tension of centuries of grotesque evolution. Streets cracked, walls sagged, debris shifted without force, and the smell of stagnant blood and burned flesh was replaced with a sudden, uncanny stillness. Mara staggered, absorbing the scale of failure. The predators were gone, the eternal victims no longer regenerated. and the city had become a silent monument to chaos, horror, and the fragility of the so-called eternal cycle. In the end, no predator remained. No ritual, no feeding, no hierarchy persisted. Humans, once eternal, were mortal again, broken, mutilated, alive, but fragile. Mara wept, stepping over the twitching remains of Victor and the feral offspring, her mind reeling with comprehension. The cycle had been perfect, grotesque, eternal, but now it had failed utterly. Riven's consciousness flickered one last time, a pulse of instinctual awareness, before collapsing entirely. The city lay quiet. No screams, no regenerative pulses, no feeding, only silence. The grotesque ecosystem that had seemed eternal had unraveled, leaving ruin, horror, and mortality in its wake. The unexpected truth hung over Mara. Nothing lasts forever, not even cycles of eternal flesh, and the universe sometimes chooses endings no one could predict.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.